One of the single most important concepts in growth hacking is word of mouth marketing. Now, let's look at the approach that a lot of companies take with marketing. Often they start with something such as Google advertising. The problem with Google advertising is that the payoff is usually linear. You pay $2 to get 1 click, you get $4 to get 2 clicks, and so on. You never really get that exponential return. You never really get virality. On the other hand, when you invest in word of mouth marketing, there are much larger economies of scale. So when you invest in the fixed costs of producing a word of mouth asset or a word of mouth generating campaign, you essentially are able to distribute that fixed cost across many, many users, because those users or those customers or those influencers spread word to multiple people each. So this is really one of the key components of how you growth hack, how you get exponential return from your marketing. Now, for the rest of this initial section, I'm going to be relying heavily on research from McKinsey Company. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about are not original thoughts. Now, I'm going to simplify and reword some of the things that McKinsey talks about to make it easier to digest. I'm also going to come up with specific examples from my experience in marketing. But by and large, what I'm going to be talking about is research from McKinsey on word of mouth. Now, I'm going to start by talking about some of the key concepts and drivers of word of mouth, so a little more of the theory and research. But at the end, I'm going to give very concrete, actionable advice on how you can stimulate word of mouth. So the really surprising thing is that very few companies actually focus on word of mouth. I'm going to explain why that's the case, or why I think it's the case later on. But first, I want to say that this is very ironic, because up to 50% of all purchases, the primary factor for those purchases is word of mouth. Word of mouth is one of the single largest drivers of purchases. Now, when you invest in word of mouth, you really have a two-factor benefit. The first is simply that it is a large driver of purchases, and it's going to give you that exponential effect that I talked about. But the second is that there's lack of competition. So not only are you getting the benefit of word of mouth as just a technique that's effective, but you're also in a low supply, high demand channel. So the payoff is even higher than it otherwise would be if other companies were rational and invested more in word of mouth. So if you're not doing word of mouth marketing, you're probably leaving a lot of money on the table. So now the key question is, why are companies not focusing on word of mouth? And I think the explanation, by and large, is that there was a lot of pressure on marketers to attribute everything, to measure everything, to know the immediate short-term return on investment on everything, or the number of leads that are generated from marketing initiatives. So there's an inherent bias to focus on things that are measurable rather than those things that have the highest impact. And what I know from doing marketing for a long time is that the things that have the highest impact, especially those that have the highest impact in the long term, are not very easy to measure. And we're going to talk about what some of those things are later on, but understand this bias towards attribution and measurable forms of marketing is very strong, and to some extent is irrational from a company perspective, but perhaps rational from a political perspective. So a marketer can easily justify his or her credibility to, for example, the finance department by being able to quantitatively show everything even if that means leaving a lot of opportunities on the table that could produce a higher return on investment. So one of the key questions is, when is word of mouth most important? Because we have different marketing channels, we have different marketing approaches, and some of them are more appropriate in some contexts than others. And one of the first key scenarios where word of mouth is particularly important is when it's the first time that a person is buying a product. So once somebody is in the habit of buying a product, you don't really need to stimulate word of mouth. Like, I like Snickers bars. I don't need somebody to necessarily tell me about Snickers for me to go and buy it. Yes, that may help, but if I habitually buy a Snickers every Friday as a treat to myself, word of mouth doesn't help that much. Now, if we think about growth hacking, often what we're doing is we're dealing with that first purchase of a product. It's a new product that's on the market, or a product that is at a small scale or at a small stage, so a lot of people have not heard about it. We're talking about companies that perhaps don't have the budget or don't have the scale to do wide-scale brand awareness TV ads. So growth hacking, to a large extent, fits this first category. It's the first time somebody's buying a product. And in some cases, it's not just the first time that they're buying your product, but it's the first time that they're buying in that category. And in some cases, not only is it the first time buying in a category, but the category itself is new. So growth hacking sometimes happens with categories that are created out of nothing. So this is very much the place of growth hacking. Word of mouth aligns almost perfectly with growth hacking scenarios. Okay, the second case is with expensive products, which is a bit ironic, because if you think about who tends to focus more on word of mouth marketing, it's probably business to consumer marketers, because one reason may be that there's less pressure for attribution, less pressure to attribute everything to lead generation in the B2C space. There's more pressure to do that in the B2B space. But we can see here that word of mouth is more important when you're selling expensive products, and expensive products tend to correlate with business to business. Of course, there are expensive consumer products such as houses and hiring a lawyer, buying a car. So word of mouth is going to be very important there. But if you're just buying some sort of impulse item at the checkout, word of mouth may not be the ideal approach that you would take. So there are three major categories of word of mouth. The first, and possibly the largest, or the one that has the largest impact on the market right now, is product experience. So someone's direct experience with the product. The second is traditional marketing, so things like advertising. And then the last is word of mouth campaigns, so marketing initiatives that are specifically designed to generate word of mouth with intention. So we'll talk about the first category, which is product experience. People are experiencing products all the time. They're using them, they're testing them, they're doing free trials, they're doing demos of products. And they don't often talk about those experiences. They don't talk about the products. When they do talk about a product is when the experience that they have deviates from what's expected. And usually it's deviation based on key variables, which I'm going to talk about at the very end of this section. So, for example, when people lose their luggage because of an airline, they talk about that. People like to complain. So there's negative word of mouth that's generated when you expect to get your luggage back and you don't. So there's a deviation from a clear expectation. We can see the example here of a guy who wrote a song about United Airlines losing his luggage. From damaging his guitar, which was his luggage. Now, the second category of word of mouth comes from traditional marketing. So this is doing things like launching TV campaigns, and because the ad was funny, or because it touched people, or it stimulated people, or it surprised people, or moved people, they talked about it with their friends. So the initial driver of awareness is just classic traditional marketing, something like TV, paid media. But often the impact from the word of mouth that's generated from traditional marketing actually has a bigger impact than the direct impact of the advertising. So this creates situations where you will see ads that are often very creative, very shocking, and you might think, oh, that's absurd. Why don't they just talk about the benefits of the product or whatever the key value proposition is that you're trying to get across? But often that's not what you see. Instead, what you see is the kind of thing that creative geniuses come up with. And if you're in the direct response marketing space where you're trying to attribute everything to offers and responses and buy now, it's hard for you to grapple with an ad like this one for Burger King where you're seeing a moldy burger. Why did they not just promote a coupon or come into Burger King today? It's because the real return on investment is not the initial advertisement. It's not the Super Bowl ad. The return on investment is coming from the people talking about it. It's coming from the PR that is generated from the campaign. It's the shock value. That's the cascade effect. That's where you get the economies of scale that word of mouth creates. So in this example, Burger King is showing a moldy burger, which is shocking. You go to Burger King to enjoy a tasty dish. Why would you want to see a moldy burger? And the point they're trying to get across is that they're using natural ingredients and not artificial preservatives. And you can visually communicate that by showing something that molds, that goes bad. It doesn't have preservatives in it. And of course, Burger King had lots of word of mouth generated from this kind of campaign. Now, Burger King also did something else shocking. They posted this on Twitter and it said, "Women belong in the kitchen," which is shocking. People are going to be in an uproar about that. It's sexist. Of course, they're not trying to be sexist. They're trying to stimulate word of mouth by making this social media post. And really what they're saying is women are underrepresented in the kitchen, and they're trying to get more women in the kitchen. Really, I think what they're trying to do is just generate word of mouth, but this is the stated purpose. So very interesting that companies are using marketing as a means of stimulating word of mouth, even though it still requires some sort of investment, either in advertising or just distribution through their social media channels, perhaps hiring a creative agency to come up with the concepts. The third category of word of mouth is intentional campaigns that are designed to generate word of mouth. And in most cases, this is basically influencer marketing. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about influencer marketing in this course, but typically when I use that word, a lot of people think I'm just talking about Instagram celebrities, fashion socialites. Influencers are sometimes those people, but in a lot of cases, it's just people that have influence. It could be professionals, it could be leaders of organizations, it could be athletes. It really just depends on the context. And an example of this is Red Bull. So Red Bull may not always be able to identify who the specific influencers are in the market, but what it does is it sponsors events where they know the influencers will be. So just to make that clear, they don't necessarily know the individuals that are going to be capable of spreading word of mouth and have influence in the market, but they know that whoever those individuals are will be at key events. So for example, extreme sports events, cliff diving events, whoever is extreme enough to go to these events, there's a high probability that these are the people that are going to be doing tweets, they're going to be doing Facebook Lives, a lot of people are going to be following them, and in that sense, they're influencers who are going to distribute the message about Red Bull. Now, intuitively, when you look at Red Bull sponsoring an event, and let's say that there are only 100 people at the event, why would a global consumer brand with mass appeal sponsor an event with just 100, 200 people? Well, again, the the ROI is hidden. It's like Super Bowl ads. The real impact is not the awareness that you generate at the event. It's the cascade effect that you're trying to generate. It's influencing the influencers who then go out and influence the wider market. And that's one of the secrets to Red Bull's success.